Hi, welcome back to the Custom Saber Shop on YouTube. My name is Rob, and today I'm going to show you how to build a basic lightsaber with sound. Just like this. Now this one is different than the one that I've already outlined how to build, although it may look the same on the outside. The insides are very different, and this one may in fact be a little easier to build than the last one I showed you how. For today, the parts are all going to be listed in the description of this video. In the way of tools, what you're going to need is, of course, a soldering iron, something that's electrostatic safe, because we're working with the Nano Biscotte soundboard, which is some precision electronics. You're going to need solder. I use these helping hands. These things are awesome for doing your electronics. Of course, you're going to need safety eyewear, as always, wire snips, a little bit of electrical tape, a Sharpie, going to come handy for today. I'm also going to be using my Dremel today. Now you can get by with using hand files, although you're going to find that it's a lot more challenging. A Dremel with a couple of attachments, including a sanding drum like this, is going to be a very helpful tool. You also may want a kill key. These are the kill keys that are for sale at the Custom Saber Shop, because this saber is going to have an internal battery with a recharge port, as opposed to the last one I showed you, which had an exchangeable battery. If you want a link to that build and see how we've already done one slightly different style, just click here and I'll provide a link to the other description, two-part video of how to build a lightsaber with sound. This is going to be a shorter video. As you're progressing, you've already got some of the skills down, so let's get started. Okay, at first glance this may look like a lot of stuff, but we're going to sort through it piece by piece and break it down and make it really simple. And for the purpose of making this video shorter so it's not stupid long, I've already gone and prepped some of these parts, and I'll explain what I've done and show you how to do that. So first things first, I've measured out this chassis and I know exactly how long it's going to go into the body, and I've determined that when the chassis is slid in, it's not going to interfere with the switch. That's going to be an important thing. So you need to measure out your plan and make sure things are going to work the way you think they are. So we're just going to move these body parts out of the way, because we're not going to use those right away. I'm going to show you some of the things I've prepped. The 440 rod, threaded rod, comes longer than this, but this is left over from another job that I did. That's why it's shorter. We're going to be cutting it anyways. I'm going to do that later. Of course, all the parts that are used in this video are going to be linked in the description of the video. So if you just want to go through and click on link by link, you can order exactly what I'm using here, with a couple of exceptions. With the LED, you'll notice that by the lens that that's actually a tri-Cree LED that, from another project. But I've wired it up just like it's a single Cree copper nova. So we're going to pretend that this is a single Cree copper nova. Those are the parts I will link to in the description. You'll notice I've wired it already. I've inserted my 0.5 ohm 3 watt resistor. That's what you see right there. And you'll notice that these wires are nicely twisted. I'm going to show you how to do that, because I've also prepped this switch. You'll notice that the wires are attached, and there's heat shrink. That's the 1/16 heat shrink from Custom Saber Shop that I've used to protect those pieces. These wires are 11 inches long, just for the purposes of this build if you're following along. I cut them 11 inches long. It's probably a little longer than I need, which is what you want to do in case you run into trouble. You cut something too short, you want a little extra wire. So if you've got a heat gun or a blow dryer or something like that, just move these parts out of the way. I'm going to turn this on low. I'm going to hold my wire. See, you notice that if you twist the wire, it always becomes untwisted as soon as you let go. You apply a little bit of heat, and for longer runs of wires like this is nice, more manageable. Your saber will be more durable. Twist it, turn it off, just hold it for a couple of seconds while it's cooling, and those wires will stay mostly twisted. You notice that they're really twisted here because they got warmer there. So if I had taken my time and done a little bit more consistent, it's not a mandatory thing, it's just kind of a best practice. So then those wires are twisted nice and ready to go as well. We'll do that with a couple of things. You'll notice I've also prepped the recharge port. So the recharge port is wired to a 18650 protected cell. Now this is just the basic 18650 protected cell. You can also get the Panasonic 18650 protected cell, which is a little bit longer lasting. If you would like to see a video showing how I wired the recharge port, the Switchcraft recharge port, just click here and a link to a different video I did just showing how to wire a recharge port. But for the sake of this video, that's done. I've got leads here that are approximately 6 or 7 inches long, about 6 inches long. That's more than we'll need. And of course the speaker. I've already prepped the speaker. This is a premium speaker because that's what I had handy. You may wish to use the 2-watt base speaker in this speaker holder for this build. It's for the chassis. You can see the chassis holes in the back of the speaker holder. And again, these wires are about 6 inches long as well. And then all the parts. All right, we're going to start with the front end of the Saber. Got my blade holder here with the blade retention screw already in. Got the body, hilt section of the Saber. First thing I'm going to do is I'm going to put in the switch. I'm using brown wires for a very specific reason. It's because I have lots of brown. So I want to run my switch through. This is pretty simple stuff. Switch goes in. Of course I'm going to need to find the end of my wires. Washer goes on first. Oops, hard to grab. And then the little nut. Now this can sometimes take a little while to get your switch, get the nuts over the edge, and to screw this together. So I'm just going to do this off camera, and then we're going to continue. It's taken me about 2 minutes to carefully, with my finger, get the nut seated on there, and then a little bit with a needle nose pliers, just to tighten it on, just very carefully. You don't need to go very tight with that. You just need to keep it so that it doesn't move around. There's no vibration. There's no vibration. So now I'm going to run my wires back through all the way to the other end, pull them through. So I've got my switch wire sticking at the end of my Saber, the pommel end. This will give me the blade end. Next thing I want to do is run my LED wires. Make sure that sits in there nice. And then thread on my blade holder. And this is going to be the quick assembly of the front end of this Saber. Make sure that's on nice and secure. I'll look in my other end, make sure I've got my nice twisted clean wires ready to go to run to my electronics and stuff for the next step. I want to point out too that this is a guarded momentary switch, which is what you need a momentary switch with the Nano Biscotte, because there's a guarded switch hole. If you would like to watch a video showing how to select a different switch and a different switch hole so that you get exactly what you want for your Saber, just click here. And I'll link to a different video that I did showing a breakdown of the different types of switches and the different types of switch holes that you'll need to order when you order your parts. So now that this front half is done and ready to go, I'm going to move that out of the way, and we're going to get set up for the next operation, which we're going to use the speaker, the recharge port, these little 1/2-inch guys, and this very special setup of chassis discs to hold the recharge port. Now if you'd like to see a video outlining a lot of the different chassis discs and how to use them in a different style build with a petite crouton, you can just click here. I'll provide a link to that. But for today I'm just going to show you the chassis discs that I'm going to use for this build. So this is going to go inside of our Saber body, this speaker holder. The chassis rods are going to thread into the holes there. In fact, we can do that right now. I want to choose the 2 holes that are opposite of each other. And I want to just thread that in until it becomes finger tight. Take the other one, go directly across from it, thread that in until it becomes finger tight. Now this chassis will slide, or this speaker holder will slide inside a double female, like the body of our Saber. We don't want it to slide all the way, we want it to stop somewhere. So that's why I'm utilizing this multi-hold non-threaded disc, which I'll link to in the description. And I've already marked the matching holes that I'm going to use because I measured it against this. And there I marked them with red. So I'm going to slide that onto threaded rod all the way down. Blue speaker wires through the little hole that has no color. Oh, I got one of them. There we go. Speaker wire. So I'm going to slide that in. So now what happens is this, you'll notice, this metal disc is a bit of a thicker diameter than the speaker holder. So when this slides into the body of the Saber, it's going to stop, and it's actually going to get held in there by the pommel when the pommel threads on. It's going to keep it nice and tight, lots of room for the speaker between the speaker and the the pommel grill. And that's going to be what secures our chassis inside of our Saber. So essentially, to start with, I'm going to slide that on over there. I'm going to get my washer and my nut, and I am going to just thread that on carefully. Needle nose pliers, use carefully, and again, you don't need to be really tight with this, you just need to keep it from vibrating and rattling around. And now this goes through, and it really doesn't matter which way or which one, these are identical. This will go through. I thought it would go through. I might have to take it off. Oh, no, it pops through. Haha. And the wires are going to fold underneath. It's going to go in that little slot. Click, just like that. Now, when you cut your wires for your battery length, you notice I cut more than I need so I can fold them over. That's what you want to do. You don't want to cut them so that they're, just half an inch and go straight to the post. You want to cut so that you can have wire to fold over for a couple of reasons. It's better for the construction of the Saber if things get moved, and if you make a mistake, you've got a little excess wire to work with to reattach something. It's just a good practice. So then I've got my wires ready to go to my Nano Biscotte soundboard. You notice I've got electrical tape on the tips of those, just so that because this is attached to the battery, it's live now. If these ends were bare and I was to touch them, there'd be a little bit of a spark, and I'd probably set off the protection circuit inside the battery, which is something I just don't want to do if you don't have to, so it's just a good little precautionary step. Now, I'm going to use these half-inch guys, and I'm going to insert this there we go. Now I got to find the holes, and I can slide this right down, and that's where that's going to go. Of course, I'm going to run my blue wires through and get set up. Sorry, you can't see it. That's how that's going to go. I'm going to run my blue wires through all the way, wires through, so that those parts made up nice and perfectly. So we have begun our chassis. I'll move on to the next step. I want to point out too that because our wires are live, the electrical tape is protecting them. There's an added step of protection we can do now that the recharge port is assembled. You take the kill key and insert it, and if I've wired my recharge port correctly, and I like to think that I have, these wires now will be dead even if they were to touch. They're not going to short circuit because the power is shut off to the red and white wires, which is the power to our soundboard. Now, of course, we're not going to use this kill key when we build the Saber, because the Nano Biscotte has a deep sleep mode, so it really makes a kill key kind of unnecessary except for long-term storage, but it's a handy thing to have for this step. Now for the next step, I know that these little two chassis discs are going to fit my Nano Biscotte. There's where my SD cards are going to go, and that is going to fit. Sometimes it's a really tight fit, but if you're patient, there goes, it slides in nicely. And you can see that there's not a lot of room for wires to fit through there. And they're not going to fit through these holes, that's where our threaded rod goes. They're not going to fit through that big hole because that's where our battery's going to go. So what I'm going to do is I've decided that I'm going to clear myself some space in this disc for wire. So I've marked it out with a Sharpie where I want that to go. I'm going to move these guys out of the way. And I'm going to get my handy dandy Dremel with just a basic stone end on it like that. You can do this with a hand file, but a Dremel is much nicer. I'm just going to carve myself some room for my wires. Now I'm using 28 gauge wire, so they're going to fit easily through that. If you're using 26 gauge, that'll still work. It's going to be a bit of a tighter fit. I know that Tim at Custom Saber Shop is going to be carrying 28 gauge wire like I'm using here. 26 gauge is a little thicker. 24 gauge would be even thicker. Generally with Sabers, you want to go with that nice thin stranded wire, so 28 gauge I think is ideal. But again, 26 will work for this build. But now I have room for my wires to clear. You'll see where that comes in handy later. I'm just going to clean up my workspace a little bit, and I want to point out too that where possible, don't break through to other compartments. It just retains the structural strength of the disc. If I was to make a nice bigger hole there and essentially then join these two compartments in the battery, might have a little more room to wiggle, might be a little bit of vibration. Probably not, but it's just still a best practice to not to break through to the different compartments in a build like this as much as you can. Okay, here comes the fun part. Sometimes during the build I like to check and make sure that my threaded rods are still turned in tight. I'm going to use these 1-inch spacers, and the reason I want to use the 1-inch spacers next is I want to leave room for where the end of my Nano Biscotte is going to sit, so that I can reach in and depress the kill key or the SD card and pop it out. I want to leave room to pop out and extract the SD card. If I was to have this butted up here, there's no room to get the SD card out without taking apart the chassis. So one of those things you try to think about before you do it. And that would be what a smart person does. So now they're through the battery hole in my chassis disc, and I'm going to hold them up out of the way while I get the battery in there, because the battery will not go if the wires are pinching. There, now you can see the battery's through and the wires are through. I've only got 4 wires, so that's a big enough hole. I can pull that tight so that the spacers slide in. My battery's in there. My battery will be further held secure by the next chassis disc that's going in. But before I want to get to that, I'm actually going to take my my Nano Biscotte. I'm going to put the SD card slot through this way, and I'm going to carefully, and you want to take your time with this, you don't want to break any electronics. You want to slide that through, not too far, but like that is fine. The next thing to go on will be these 3/4 inch spacers. And then our final chassis disc. Now, this is going to be the interesting part, because we're not going to fit that on just yet, because I still want to run wires and solder them to my Nano Biscotte before I finish this up. Because I'm going to run out of room, because this chassis disc is going to sit right over top of all my nice solder points. So I'm going to take my time now, and I'm going to attach these wires, and I'm going to go get my body of my Saber, and I'm going to figure out how long my wires need to be, and I'm going to attach the wires there. And then at some point we're going to clip off the chassis, and it won't extend past the end of this battery here. So I'm probably going to measure with the end of the battery about 1/4 inch outside the body of the Saber, and that's why I'm going to measure my wire lengths and maybe give it a little bit extra and attach them. Now, as you can see, I've used my printed off diagram of the Nano Biscotte and where all the connectors go, and I've started connecting my speaker connections to the proper ones there, and I could run the power and negative, the positive and negative, but I happen to know, having done this before, that I'm going to want to twist an additional wire for the switch onto the negative and my positive wire from the LED onto the positive and join them as well. So I'm not going to do them just yet, because the next thing to do is going to be to collect the other end of my Saber and run my wires through. Now, this chassis disc, I didn't drill or I didn't carve an extra hole for wires. That's because I've measured and I don't think I really need them. I think these wires will clear because they're 28 gauge. They'll clear underneath the Nano Biscotte as it sits in here. I guess we'll find out in a few minutes. If you want to take the time and clear out another wire channel like I did with the first one, you could go ahead and do that. Especially if you're using 26 gauge wire, you may want to do that. Now, the switch wire negative and the negative to the board, I'm going to twist those together. It doesn't matter which is which, because the switch, both legs are the same, as long as one of them I decide is the negative. So I'm going to twist those to negative, and I'm going to solder them to the negative side of the board. The positive to LED, which is the white, not to confuse you, and I'm going to twist that together with the positive from my battery, or from my recharge port. So these two wires are going to go together, these two wires are going to go together, and I'm going to solder them to the board. Now, when I'm twisting wires together like this and soldering them, I've already done those two. I want to strip off a little bit more than I would normally need So in this case, about 1/4 of an inch. I've got 1/4 of an inch on the both of those, and then I move that guy out of the way. And I twist these red and white wires together. And then right away, before they slip, I'm going to grip them in my helping hands. I'm going to clear my electronics out of the way because, if you've watched my videos, you know that soldering over top of your electronics is a very bad idea. Now, if you've got short wires, in a case like this, and you feel like you need to solder over top of your electronics, just take a piece of paper or something, put the piece of paper in the way, covering your electronics, so that when you go to apply your solder, if any slips or drips, it's not going to fall on your board and bridge any of those circuit paths and create a nightmare for you. Now I've just soldered those two together. It's longer than I need, but while it's still hot, I'm going to twist, burn my fingers just a little bit. It's part of the price you pay for building a lightsaber. And now when it cools, those will stay twisted. I'm going to snip this to be about the length that I want, about like that. And now my wires are joined and ready to solder to their appropriate place on the board. I'm going to take this moment to double check that I've run the wires through the appropriate holes so that everything's going to go nicely when I solder it. Okay, I've got ready to solder. You'll see now that my white wire from the recharge port, I gave enough room for it to curl around and go back. So that's useful for a couple of reasons, and one is setting it up. So in order to pinch the wire in my helping hands and have it line up properly, I need enough wire to be able to route it. If I had it too short, it would be really tricky to get that to go. And you'll notice that I put my wire across the pad as opposed to dropping it through the hole. This is just a better practice, and as you'll see as we try to slide this disc on, I want the profile to be really low. A little bit of solder, inspect it. That's a good joint. I'll do that with the positive, and then we'll keep going. You'll see all my wires are attached now. Of course, I've got my speaker wires. I've got the the positive wire to my switch. The flash on clash pad is blank. Then I've got my negative to the LED, and I've got my negative switch pad and negative to the recharge, positive to the recharge, and positive to the LED. Of course, that's all in the manual, the breakdown of where the wires go. I've fit my wires through the opening, and I've slid this chassis disc over the battery, and now I'm just going to carefully slide it, making sure my wires go where I want. And you'll see it slides right over my Nano Biscotte. And I can slide it right down and make sure everything's nice and tight on my chassis. So now that my chassis is together, now I can snip down these rods, and I can put my brass 440 nuts on. And the way we do this is we're going to be really careful with it. Obviously we want to keep our wires tucked out of the way. There's a couple of different ways to do it. I don't want to cut too close to my battery and endanger my battery. So I'm actually going to cut them right about the same length as the battery. Now the way I cut them, if I was to use a pair of wire snips or something like that, that's going to pinch them. And then the threads are going to be damaged and I won't be able to get my nut on. The ideal thing to use is a Dremel with a cutoff wheel. The cutoff wheel is like this, and it spins. Of course, you don't want it to spin and nick into your battery. You're going to have a lot of problems. So I'm not going to do it that way today. What I'm going to do is I'm going to cut it with snips. I'm going to use heavier ones than the ones I showed you. And then I'm going to use a Dremel sanding wheel. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to sand down the tip so that it essentially takes the pinched part, just cleans it off. So the threads will be exposed and clean and ready to receive the nut. Another tip, don't use your nice wire snips to cut 440 stainless steel rod. You will wreck them. That's not what they're for. You need big, beefy wire cutters like that. I'm going to measure where my battery goes. Be careful not to damage my battery. And I'm going to squeeze with all my might. And that is a lot of work. Switch it over, get the other one. And that end flew clear across my shop, which is another reason we're wearing eye protection, because things go flying. Now, You may have gotten lucky and you may be able to thread your nut on, but I seriously doubt it. So I'm going to take my Dremel wheel and I'm going to get started on that. Now I just realized before I sand down these ends, we're all wired up and connected. So whenever you complete your wiring and connection, it's time for a test. So I've got my SD card here ready to go, loaded, and it comes that way, I guess. And you see I've got lots of room in here now. I can just click it in without using those pliers. It's all clicked in. I want to go over and double check my wires, make sure nothing's touching. Everything's neat enough for right now. Pull the kill key. I hear my boot up sound. I hit the momentary button. I've got my blue LED. It looks kind of purple on camera. Very bright blue. So it works. So now I can put the kill key back in and continue with the build. Now if at that point something didn't work, I want to immediately put the kill key back in so that I don't damage anything if I've got a wire crossed or a short circuit somewhere, and then figure out what it was before I proceed any further. But we're working. So I'm going to get my Dremel. I'm going to sand those down. Now whenever you're doing this, you want to take your time and be very, very careful. I don't want to touch any of my wires because at the speed the Dremel spins, I could cut open a wire, exposing the wire inside. I want to make sure I don't touch my battery while this is spinning because that could open up the heat shrink on the battery and damage the battery, and that's with these lithium ions you want to be really, really careful. So make sure you've got steady hands and you're in a good spot. If you do not have steady hands, then what I would recommend is taking several layers of masking tape and tape off the area that you want to be really careful not to touch. It would be nice if you could just slide out the whole battery and do this without it. If you wanted to take apart the whole chassis at this point, now that you know the lengths of these, sand them off and then reassemble the chassis, you could do that too, if you don't trust yourself. But I trust myself. You get this Dremel going, hold it really securely, nice and flat on the table. Now this is heating up as I do it. I don't want to melt my acrylic, so I'm going to do this fairly quickly. You see it smoking? That looks pretty good. And that should do it. I don't want to touch those because they're very hot, so I'm going to wait till they cool down, and when they do, I'm going to put the nuts on. So getting those nuts on here was actually the most difficult part of the job so far. I had to doctor the ends a little bit, the tips, but once they're threaded on, they're good. Now you may wish to have a couple of additional, half-inch spacers to take up this end before your nut goes on, or do what I've done because I didn't want sharp protrusions sticking out into my saber, interfering with my wires, perhaps cutting them. I just use 1/8 inch heat shrink and cut a slip. It goes over the exposed silver rod, stainless steel rod, and provides a nice end there that's not going to cut any wires. So now we're ready. My wires, I've twisted them just a couple turns because what I want is I want them to coil up like a spring inside the saber, and I want to make sure as I'm inserting my chassis into my saber that none of the wires are pinching and folding over and are going to catch on any of the discs. So I want to make sure it slides in. Now if you've got an older body like this, these chassis discs may be a really tight fit inside the older body. You may need to sand them down in order to get them to fit. All the newer custom Saber Shop parts, going back a couple of months, all the chassis discs slide really nicely inside of them, but this is an older one, so it does fit quite tight. But as you can see, it slides all the way in. It stops at that metal disc, and I can put my pommel on. Really nice. No vibration. The only vibration here is the blade retention screw. And it's louder because the hilt is all sealed up now. And that is my saber. When it comes time to change the SD card or whatever, I just get a good grip on this, wiggle it a bit. Yours probably won't be this tight. Slide it out. Again, you don't need a kill key in, except for long-term storage, because the Nano Biscotte has got a really nice deep sleep mode. So it'll go into deep sleep and stay good for months on the shelf without a kill key in there. And of course, when it comes time to recharge a saber, you just pull it out and plug in your your battery charger for the single cell, 3.7 volt, 3.6 volt, 18650, and you're good to go. I'll link to the proper battery charger in the video description as well. So there you go. A basic lightsaber with sound and a really cool chassis. So I hope that's been fun, an introductory build, and I hope you caught the bug and will want to get more and more complex. Again, if you want to see how to install a flash on clash using a power extender and a build similar to this, then just click here, and I'll provide a link to the wiring for how to do flash on clash with a 3-die LED and a power extender. So again, thanks for watching.